Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. And we have Dr. Scott Richmond. He's a biotoxin illness health coach. And so we're so excited to have him. Welcome, Dr. Scott. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you on this journey.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. I've been a chiropractor since 2005. So that's where my health career started. But unfortunately, in 2007 and 2008, I started getting very sick around the time that my first daughter was born. And what I discovered is that I had been living in a home with toxic mold. And that really, started this journey over the last, decade plus, and discovering what, the processes that it's going to take to help me get well. And the role that I discovered, many years into the journey of parasites. So I know we're going to talk a lot about that today. But like I said, I went through chiropractic school. I was in active practice, and then I got very ill. I found myself not being able to practice. I was in the hospital multiple times and went through hundreds of thousands of dollars, traveling throughout the country, multiple practitioners to really get the solutions. And then about 6-7 years ago, I was working with our clients in the office, and many of them would have different health challenges. And so we, would put together programs and protocols for them. And then I fully made the jump into, I coach clients around the world virtually. So I'm not in a brick and mortar practice anymore, which is awesome because I literally
especially now, right?
Yeah. I mean, and who knew that this was going to all happen, but it hasn't changed, my role and what I do working with our clients around the world. So that's been an awesome thing during this challenging time. And so that's really, how I got to where we're at today, and helping other people really discover the missing pieces that they've just been challenged to put them all together. We kind of get focused on maybe one area or the other, but what I've found through my own journey is we really got to look at all of them and how they marry up together and how do we address them appropriately.
Okay, so I want to talk, we're going to jump into parasites in just a minute, but before we do, I want to talk about mold because I think that, can you talk about the connection between mold and hypothyroidism and kind of heavy metal toxicity, like what, how that can really kind of do a fast downward spiral of disease there.
Absolutely.
So what exactly, let's say, and I know for me personally, I had a stool sample done and they were looking at it and they said that one of my big thing is I had mold in my gut. So what exactly does that mean and how do you fix it? Like how do you get it and then how do you fix it?
I mean, you just summarized my entire journey, actually. And what I discover and what I would tell any mold client is that it's never just mold. I had been dealing with, what I have, it took me quite some time to really put the pieces together, that I was dealing with underlying chronic viral infections. And what I believe the first biggest insult is this chemical toxicity before we were even born. And the main thing would be heavy metals. And so going through childhood and starting to have some symptoms pop up, really struggling with recover. I was super active in sports and things like that, but my recovery just wasn't what I thought it should be, especially being young. But then, when I started living in the home that we had bought, it was an older home, and that was my main source of mold. So definitely our homes, I mean, it's well over 50%, if not 75% of American homes and even buildings, workplaces that are dealing with, mold issues, water damaged buildings. I mean, we want to talk about a pandemic. I feel like the mold issues that we deal with literally around the world, but, right here in the United States is a really big problem. So that was my main source, but man, we can get mold exposure from even just our foods, right? So a lot of the grains. So I'm in Iowa, so we feed the world and a ton of grains. But the problem is that if they're not dried very quickly, they get moldy. So food sources is another big one that maybe not all the time are we thinking about, like what's going in our mouth. Well, as we eat, you mentioned, getting mold down into the gut. But what I feel the biggest thing, first takeaway with mold or mold illness would be is having this terrain that has been interfered with. And that's where the heavy metals come in, really weakening our immune system. Along comes with heavy metals would be parasites. So we'll get into that, but weakening the immune system. So then we can't naturally be able to deal with these allergens. But for some people like myself, we are more genetically susceptible to not being able to deal with mold and the mycotoxins that they produce. And that's roughly about a quarter of the population. And so, there's a difference between having the allergy and true mold illness. But what I discovered is that my terrain just was not optimal. And then the final straw was living in a home that was extremely toxic with mold. And it took me quite probably about 4 to 5 months to really put that piece together. But I didn't have to do any special testing. We had water damage, down in the basement, and wherever there's water, there's potential for mold. And it was really cold that winter, so the house wasn't breathing, which is another issue of why we're seeing so many buildings with mold issues, in this country. But that's where the terrain really comes into play, I believe, and why I say it's never just the mold.
Hey guys, I wanted to tell you I'm offering a free weight loss virtual Bible study. Now is the perfect time to focus on understanding true hunger and fullness and learn what the Bible has to say about it. All you have to do is go to chantelrayway.com/Bible study. After you sign up, you'll receive a 6-week Bible study video that you can watch on your own, or you can get a small group of people and do it together. That's chantelrayway.com/Bible study for your free 6-week Bible study course. Well, it's funny because there's it's a book about children, and the book is called The Orchid and the Dandelion. And he is a writer who said over the years, he began to liken 2 different kinds of children, kind of like 2 different kinds of flowers, that some are dandelions and some are orchids. Like an orchid is more sensitive and they are more reactive. And then a dandelion, they just like flourish. I mean, it could be any kind of weather and they're growing everywhere. And so I always kind of joke, I say, I'm an orchid.
I am very much an orchid myself.
And what's funny is I don't know here, but if you come to my office or come to my house, I have orchids everywhere. And so I'm like, see, I am an orchid.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is, what I feel makes mold and mold illness so complex is you can take, 100 people into the same environment and have literally 100 different patterns of symptomatology. And that, so talking about sensitivity, I was, hospitalized from it. My daughter had a mold cough. As an infant. She also, within 1 week of being born, had a systemic rash, and her mom really didn't have any symptoms. So we have 3 different individuals living in the exact same environment with different outcome. So that's what we went through in, end of 2007 and early 2008.
Let's get right to, because I don't like to tell people the problem without coming up with the cure. So
Absolutely.
Let's give them some really practical ways to how to heal their gut from toxic mold illness. What are some really practical things they can do?
Yeah. First off, we definitely want to be binding up the toxins, because the real issue, whether it's parasites, heavy metals, mold, is inflammation. So a lot of gut inflammation happens. Mold is using heavy metals, especially mercury, to kind of protect itself. And so we've got to really address those 2 big issues: is clear out the other toxins that are being used to protect the mold, but then also use the antimicrobial effects, especially in the gut. So I use, various types of fasting. I love bone broth fasting so that we can get some minerals, we can get some nutrients, but also helping to starve down, reducing the sugar intake. Just from a lifestyle standpoint, that's, a lot of people can do that. The next thing would be, and extremely important, is the binding aspect. So we use some very specific bioactive carbons to make sure that we're systemically binding the toxins, especially ammonia, that other pathogens and also especially the molds are giving off, so that we're not, reabsorbing them throughout our body. So that works in the gut, but it also works systemically. And even for myself and many others, their brain is being affected because we have this brain and gut connection. And so a lot of times we'll see those symptoms with brain fog, headaches, things like that, light sensitivity. So binding is extremely important, along with proper liver function. So drainage. So I don't like to jump right into, just throw a whole bunch of antimicrobials at any type of infection. We want to make sure that drainage pathways are open. So we've got, your liver, your gallbladder, your lymphatics, the kidneys, so that we're able to flush things out. And then we're also able to bind while we're starting to use the antimicrobials for what they're designed for, which is to knock that infection down. So those are, the techniques that I would begin with. One of the other things that's, fairly new that has been extremely important and so much easier to use now than what I've done in therapies in the past using ozone is we actually use a liquid stabilized biomolecular oxygen. The one thing is that mold it's anaerobic. It doesn't like oxygen. And so it's really been good to pair that with any other antimicrobial that somebody may be using for mold, fungal infections, things like that. Pairing that with, re-oxygenating the tissues, the gut, and really helping to drive down that inflammatory response. Those are probably the three big things that I think anybody really can do to begin with.
I love it. Well, let's talk about eating a low mold diet. So for me, I know that I need to really limit some foods for me that have high mold. And so there's certain things, like for me, I don't drink alcohol at all.
Yeah.
Because for me, I don't feel good when I do it. And everyone's like, why don't you drink? I'm like, I've actually never been a big drinker. Just never been. Maybe my first year of college or something I was. Besides that, I really have never been a big drinker. And so things like corn or wheat or sugar or soy or alcohol or peanuts, those are the kind of foods that I just have to literally just say, no, thank you. Because I know that my body doesn't do well when I eat them. Can you talk about kind of what foods are antifungal and what you recommend eating tons of and what you recommend limiting as much as possible if you have some mold issues?
Yeah. I mean, so we often will use a lot of steamed veggies, especially if we modify even some fasting techniques for those that are maybe a little bit more challenge and sensitive. So lots of cruciferous vegetables, garlics, things like that. Also, even using medicinal mushroom complexes that are, becoming much more widely available and really good to use. You think, oh, well, I shouldn't eat mushrooms because it's a fungus. Right. But the reality is, and I verified this with a very well-known formulator, that they're going to have the antimicrobial, antifungal properties. So getting those mushrooms in are going to be really good from a systemic approach. But also some of them are really going to be supportive of brain health, which I like, because many mold clients suffer from a lot of issues with brain inflammation, which also leads to liver and bile duct and lymphatic flow issues. So we want to really support all of those things. Staying away from dried fruits, making sure that if you are a coffee drinker, that you using a product that has been tested. But if you're early on, I would avoid 100% exactly like what you're saying is I'm not going to go there. But I believe that there are definitely some things that aren't a forever thing. Everybody's going to maybe do a little bit better than others with certain foods like that. And you do, find those things out, through the journey. But at the very beginning, I would cut all of those things that you mentioned out for sure, 100%. That's always the rule. So that's the food sources that are highly, suspicious of mold. And then also making sure that you're not living or working in mold, or driving around in your car that has mold in it too, because the number one thing for recovery is remove the source.
Mm. So let's talk about that, because it's funny, because it's not as easy to find people who are really qualified to check for mold in your house.
Yeah.
So is there any companies that you suggest that do a good job, or websites you can find people, or what are tests? Like, this one guy came to our office because we had him check for mold, and I was like, he just did some wackadoodle thing, and I don't know if it was, real or not. So what are you looking for when these people?
I'll be honest. I mean, that's a very good question. And after over a decade, it's really hard to come by a great answer, because there are so many companies out there that they will sell a process or something that's proprietary. You don't really necessarily know all of what they're doing. Does it work? Does it not? Are they taking some drastic measures that actually could even be more detrimental in the long run? So really paying attention to that. I recommend a really easy book. It's called Mold Money. It walks through some very simple things and what to look for, and some legal aspects of remediation, because it is a major, major problem. And I think it really starts with the fact that the EPA just hasn't set standards for what a clean living environment really is and what it should look like. But it's also because it's a moving target. You have, maybe more or less susceptibility than I do. And then most people, even though they shouldn't be living in mold, they may not, react the way we were talking about at the beginning. And so I think that's why it is a moving target and hard to find companies that really get it. But a couple of things is making sure that all work is done under negative pressure, so that nothing is getting disturbed and spread throughout any of the work or the house, the workplace. Making sure that the dust and things like that are controlled, because mold is going to be carried on that dust and it can get anywhere. So you want to make sure that they're containing that. I wouldn't be using any types of harsh chemicals and stuff like that. He talks about even literally soap and water. If you see areas of, say, drywall that have been water damaged, you cut it out. Anything that has been water, saturated, if it's not dried within 24 hours, I would absolutely remove that. Those are about the simplest things you can do. And then if you can control the air too with things like air scrubbers, or, much more higher quality HEPA filters that they have. A lot of these companies will use that. But, if they're talking about using harsh chemicals, antimicrobials, things like that, I would be a little skeptical and ask more questions for sure.
All right, so let's talk about parasites. What would you say is, if you see different patients all the time, what is the top 3 most common parasites, and what are you doing to treat them?
Yeah. So roundworms, flukes, that's a big one. I got a little bit more down the fluke road because we discovered with my wife, she was really sensitive to things that would support her liver, which we have to do, because that's how we're going to, really clear out a lot of the toxic load, heavy metals and things like that. And what we discovered is she was dealing with liver flukes. For myself personally, hookworm. And then another really big one that seems to play a big factor that maybe, not everybody has heard about is strongyloides. And for myself, what I discovered with strongyloides is how it's affecting lungs and also the sinuses. And after I got out of the mold, and a lot of times we're dealing with sinus issues. Many people have maybe heard about Marcons. There is, testing that you can do for Marcons, which is a resistant infection. But I feel like strongyloides may have been a bigger factor, especially if you know that you've already gotten out of the source of mold and you've been maybe going through some other, steps and protocols. That working on the sinuses, there's some just really good information about strongyloides and loving the mucosal membranes. So one of the very first things that I always will recommend from a foundational standpoint of parasites is Mimosa pudica seed. So we use all kinds of different products with our clients, but Mimosa pudica seed comes from India. It's sold by a company called Cellcore. They, literally have all of the stock of the seed, which makes it unique. And it was a game changer for me because for many years, I didn't understand the histamine issues. I'd started having allergies that I'd never had in my life. This is before I discovered the mold issues. And it took me quite a few years to really understand the role that parasites were having for me, a lot of gut issues along with that. But the histamine, the allergies, even, my eosinophil count on my blood work was super high. And I was seeing the best GI doctor here in town. And, they of course go down the conventional medicine route of, here's your steroid and here's your antacid medication, omeprazole, which made me worse because my stomach integrity has, I had leaky gut. I was zinc deficient, alkaline phosphatase was super low. So I had no, good barrier. And so anything was coming in, it was stimulating that immune response. And I developed an esophageal issue called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is running rampant in the population. Well, one of the connections that I made was hookworm. So there's some formulas out there that you can, use for hookworm. Tari is an herb. You can find it in some different formulas that are out there. That was super effective, along with pairing that with the Mimosa pudica seed, which is anti-parasitic. But what I like about it is it's also a sticky binder. So when it gets down into the GI tract and you've got the water, it turns almost like a gel. And so it's going to grab the viruses, the bacteria, it's going to disrupt the parasites, but it's also going to help lay down that protective barrier so that all your other efforts for healing the gut and the tight junctions that are inflamed and where things get down in and cause that immune response, it's now protecting that while you're, continuously working on getting the parasites out.
That's awesome. So I know that you said that your wife had a liver fluke, right? Yeah. And so for people who don't know, a liver fluke is a parasitic worm. It is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the infections in humans usually occur after they're eating raw or undercooked freshwater fish, right? And so after liver flukes have been ingested, they kind of travel from your intestines to your bile ducts. And do they kind of go into your liver and they grow and live in your liver, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even up into the lungs too. So not just liver, but liver it's kind of the first settling point for sure. And we got lucky because we had done some testing from a friend of mine who's amazing with parasites. And he kind of pointed me down that path. I'm like, this makes sense because every time that we're trying to do liver support, she's just not tolerating it, which we typically don't see that. Then we discovered it. And when I told her, hey, I
don't do well with any kind of, my body actually, if I take any kind of liver detox, literally I will get a rash all over my body. So do you think that could be a sign that
bile duct issues? Yeah, potentially. I mean, and there obviously it's, at the end of the day, if you know the specifics, hey, that's awesome. But the approach that we take with parasites is we're going to use multiple formulas so that we're hitting all the big ones anyways. So even if you don't know, because the testing isn't real great. Sometimes we can get lucky with seeing, information on a test about that, somebody has a specific parasite. Most often not. We got really lucky with my wife because she could actually identify it in her stool. And so a liver fluke literally looked like a little rolled up tomato peel, very thin. And I've actually had another client to where she was, you talked about the rash when you're working on liver, which is very common because the skin is the largest detox organ. Anything that I see with rashes, I think liver and gut for sure. But she was pulling, these things out, and I have pictures of it, like pulling them out of her skin. So parasites do crazy things, and they can be everywhere, not just in not just intestinal, but definitely, liver, the lungs, even up in the brain, the sinuses. So depending on the individual's, presentation of that is, there's some, different techniques that you can use, but the foundation of it all, definitely the mimosa pudica seed. And then if you have identified something, there would be specific, anti-parasitic formulas or ingredients that you could match together with that.
So let's talk about your top kind of 5 remedies that you do. So you talked about the mimosa pudica seeds. Yeah. How long are you doing that for?
When it's been about 3.5 years or so starting to use that and really putting parasites on the map. We used to say, make sure that you're going through 3 to 6 months. But if you're dealing with, with other, more complex health challenges like mold illness, Lyme, co-infections, viral issues, things like that, and maybe have struggled for, a good handful of years, what we found is, it's on the longer end. I mean, I've got clients that have, done consistently parasite support for a year. And then there's strategies with rotation of product and also even just taking a break. But it's all kind of based on a lot of their lifespan, making sure we're dealing with the adult, the juvenile, and the larvae stages. But, many of them are trapped and they're hiding out, and it takes some time. And that's where, making sure that we're working on the heavy metal load is going to be huge because parasites are acting like a sponge. So those that have said, maybe have dealt with parasites and gone through some programs to deal with that with maybe a little lackluster results, look outside the box. Have we dealt with the heavy metals? Because a lot of times it's back and forth. I think they both act like a lock and a key, and you've got to deal with both of them. And some people are going to have more heavy metal burden than others. Some are going to have more of the parasite burden. And so you work with that. So at least 3 months. But what I typically see with our clients is they're going much longer than that. And consistency is absolutely the key. Today's the full moon. So this is a great week that our clients that have maybe been working on this for quite some time, this is the week where they bring these formulas back in and they do what we call the parasite blast. They're really hitting them hard because they're a lot more active right now. And that's a strategy that we use to help clear them out as they keep going to eventually.
And to talk about that for just a second, I want to ask you 2 more questions. Yeah. One is, and I've heard this, why is it that parasites are more active in the full moon? And I want you to talk about some medicine, like there are prescription medicines like mebendazole, albendazole, some other things like that. Yeah. And they are extraordinarily expensive. One of my friends told me that they had gotten a prescription for parasites, and I think they said it was like $1,000. They didn't have insurance. Yeah. They like 3 pills was like $1,000. And I was like, what? Yeah. So my understanding around the full moon, I mean, we're energetic beings. So we're dealing with a lot of energetic shifts. We get the full moon cycle. I mean, everything's this dynamic, evolving universe that we live in. And so that's really my only understanding is that we are, the gravitational pull, the energetics, they just get more active. They're going through their lifespan too, just like we go through ours. So that's my understanding there. And it's kind of held true. And some people will notice that they feel symptoms ramp up as early as a week before the full moon. Some people are kind of during this phase, and then some people are on the back end of it. It takes some time to identify that, but after doing this for a good handful of years, we can kind of describe the experiences that we've seen. Now, one of the you mentioned medications. Most of our clients, we actually don't even have to go there
So it's kind of been a game changer that, well, you don't have to go to the medications, which can have side effects for sure. But if we need to, which my wife and I had done parasite work for quite some time, me the longest, and we decided to add in a formula called praziquantel, which is specific for flukes. But you've got the ones you listed. Ivermectin is a big one. So those are some that I'm able to work with a medical doctor that can work with clients that if we want to add that in. But I would never typically have a client start with the medication because we have so many other tools that aren't going to have that, drug side effect per se.
And what are some of the side effects with those drugs?
I mean, whether it's, you're going to have a lot of GI irritation, whether it's extreme constipation or extreme diarrhea. I know one of the side effects for the praziquantel that he mentioned and talked to us about was dizziness. The other thing is depending on, and not to have anybody get scared or freaked out, but if somebody is dealing with parasites that are affecting their brain, it has been reported that people could have seizures. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind. Definitely, like yourself, you could express the clearing out of these infections through your skin, rashes. So those are some good clues that there are underlying issues that, I look at them as welcome effects. But sometimes they are definitely uncomfortable, and we have to, monitor some of what's going on.
Love it. Well, any other thoughts before we end of things that you would say, these are the things that are super, super important for people to do?
I work with clients that have been everywhere, to the Lyme and mold doctors, and they've done a lot of really great things. And one of the things that I absolutely preach and would preach to anybody is the order matters. It's a pecking order. It's a journey. It's a roadmap. And if we do some things out of order, like if somebody was just to jump in right now and start killing off parasites, but yet, like in your case, maybe there is some liver congestion going on, the bile duct is clogged. Well, we can't get that stuff out as they're dying off. And then they're going to get a lot more reactions, a lot of unwelcome symptoms with that, just because it was done out of order, even though they did the right steps for dealing with parasites. So drainage support, making sure that we're, especially right now, we're all under, a little bit more stress that is unprecedented. We're not used to living this way. And so being adaptive, controlling our stress, being at peace with things while we walk through the journey, I think is a good mindset to start with. Drainage support, binding, and then you start to open things up. And then, as you can keep going deeper and deeper, you can use, more of the formulas, go after them stronger. But the number one thing I would say is you have to be persistent, because many times that clients are like, hey, I've done a parasite cleanse before. Well, they've done maybe some good work, but if they're still struggling with, some of the other things that they present with, I know that parasites still need to be worked on, and worked on maybe a little different than they've done in the past.
Love it. Well, this has been great. Tell listeners where they can find you and where they can follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thrivehealthcenters.com is our main website. You can reach out. You can join our newsletter list. We have a contact button. If you're interested or just have questions about how to put all this together, there is a button there that you can submit in just your information, and then we can reach out to you to find out how we can help you more in this complex journey of parasites and autoimmune, thyroid issues, you name it. And so you can also follow us on Facebook. at Thrive Health also.
I thought of one more question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So I have heard people say that bentonite clay, that is, it's basically the consumption of small amounts of clay, and that's good for removing parasites. Have you ever tried that or used it? And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, because mold was my, really big topic at first, binding was what saved my life, and understanding the role of the liver, the bile duct, and how to make sure that we're not recirculating these toxins. So it started really with that for me. So I'll use some different products that would have bentonite clay. I like to use them for those that are maybe dealing with a lot more of the GI symptoms, specifically to the gut. So a lot of the activated charcoals, bentonite clays, things like that, that's going to be really good for the gut. We also use a product that is a bioactive carbon, that is an active carbon that works systemically, called Biotoxin Binder. So I may use those in conjunction with each other, just depending on if they need more gut protection from binding, or if they can just use the Biotoxin Binder to clean up the ammonia and any of the other toxins that the liver is flushing out through the bile.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and you guys stay tuned. We have another episode coming up in just a few.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.